Welcome. My name is Doug Carlson, and I am CEO of the National Utility Contractors Association, known as NUCA, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our 2020 Virtual Washington Summit. NUCA is the leading trade association working solely for the utility construction and excavation industry in the United States. Founded in 1964, NUCA has a nationwide network of state and regional chapters and member companies that represent utility contractors, excavators, suppliers, manufacturers, and other providers in the water, sewer, gas, electric, telecommunications, and excavation industries. We dig America. Today's topic focuses on pipeline safety legislation. Joining our panel today is Mr. Tom Butler from Burgess Silville, Mr. Martin Edwards from Ice Miller Strategies, Mr. Evan Wyman from Wyman Associates, and our moderator, Mr. Zach Bricati. Thank you for joining us, and I'll now turn it over to Zach.
Thank you, Doug. So to get started, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which is part of the Department of Transportation. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, is responsible for regulating and overseeing approximately 2.2 million miles of gas distribution pipeline, 301,000 miles of interstate gas transmission pipelines, and some 216,000 miles of hazardous liquid pipelines. The program is typically reauthorized every 4 years, but in late 2018, there was a high-profile incident in the Merrimack Valley in Massachusetts where an overpressurization of a gas distribution system led to several explosions and one death. So almost immediately in the aftermath of that tragic incident, there was a big push to crash down on the gas distribution industry. Since then, the pipeline safety debate has had a distinct focus on gas distribution. As a result of the debate surrounding that, the bill has stalled and the program expired at the end of September last year. Now, NUCA has weighed in on a few major issues relating to the current pipeline safety legislation, and we wanted to talk about it more in this year's summit agenda. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. My first question for them, we know that safety management systems, or SMS, is a hot topic at PHMSA and throughout the pipeline industry, including the gas distribution construction sector. Can you describe how contractors approach construction safety and the industry's feelings about SMS?
Well, Zach, this is Evan Wyman. I'll weigh in on that. I can say up front that construction contractors have elaborate safety programs, and so safety SMS is not too far of a reach. We support the top to bottom approach of SMS. We support the fact that SMS requires chief executives buying in down to the person in the field, and this commitment for continuous improvement. We are concerned with language in the pipeline bill that would mandate SMS. We feel like a mandate would take away from the safety culture that SMS is all about and make it more of just a checklist thing. Do they have safety management? Yes. Rather than letting the industry implement true top to bottom safety management.
Let me to that end. Oh, go ahead, Martin.
And I would just add to what Evan said, that safety management system is sort of an alternative to or a supplement to traditional regulation, but should not be viewed as the same thing. I think SMS should be viewed as an evolving program that an operator and its contractors use to improve safety, and I think that the systems and the goals associated with SMS don't lend themselves to a traditional regulatory approach. I think you need to have flexibility for each operator and how they implement those programs, change them and modify them and improve them over time.
I think that's.
I was going to add that we have, as a construction company, one of the problems that we have is workforce development and having enough good skilled labor. So the last thing we want to do is be unsafe with the labor that we have. We want to protect everybody, make sure that they can come back to work every day. So safety is paramount for us, just so that we can get our work done.
And speaking of safety, I just want to move on to another topic. So we know that pipeline operators already face steep fines when they're found responsible for violations to pipeline safety regulations. However, we've also seen increasing in today's tense climate, increasing criminal activities occurring during pipeline protests that might compromise safety. Can you elaborate on what you see in the field?
Well, Zach, this is, I can just tell you what I've heard is that increasingly we do see criminal activities going on during these protests. All we're looking for is specifying that vandalism, tampering with or impeding, disrupting the operation or construction of a pipeline are punishable. And this is already state law in several states. We're just looking for language in the federal regulations to deal with what is becoming an increasing problem.
Yeah, and I can speak. My company specifically does not do any kind of pipeline work, but I have plenty of friends in the industry that do the work throughout the country, and this is absolutely an issue that they have experienced. You know, criminal damage to the pipeline and their equipment. And yeah, like Evan had mentioned, the laws exist. We just want them enforced.
And Zach, let me just put a caveat out. We completely support the right for peaceful activism, but trespassing and turning a valve and some of the stuff we've heard, you know, turning a valve compromises pipeline safety. Burning a backhoe or taking a shot at a pipeline also compromises pipeline safety. We just want to see more protections put in for not just the operators, but the folks building the pipelines as well.
All right, if no one has anything left to add on that topic, then let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little more about damage prevention. So in further response to the Merrimack Valley incident, proposed pipeline legislation would also require PHMSA to not only require operators to maintain records, including maps and drawings, and ensure their availability to appropriate personnel and state and federal authorities, but we know that this is a longstanding issue with excavation contractors and support provisions to improve on anything, including maps, drawings, and other documentation that would improve the facility locating process. So we know the importance of damage prevention in other utility excavation projects, but can you elaborate on this point specifically for gas distribution and pipelines?
There are fundamental responsibilities in damage prevention that are evident. The first is that we want our underground facility operators to belong to the respective one-call center and for there to be no exemptions at all. Underground facility operators must ensure that their facilities are located and marked accurately. And excavators, we have to call 811 before we dig, respect the markings, and dig carefully by potholing during excavation. And potholing is a slower, safer method of excavation to make sure that we know where everything is located so that we can then operate safely and productively. Exemptions of responsibilities in this process only compromise safety, and state enforcement authorities must do their job and fully enforce state damage prevention law.
And Zach, if you don't mind me doing this, Martin, I put you on the spot representing the operators. I think you'd agree that any exemptions to damage prevention law only compromise damage prevention.
Certainly do agree. There may be some examples of some very de minimis activities which are appropriate for exemptions, but can be addressed at the state level on a case-by-case basis. But we ultimately feel that these damage prevention programs are the most effective when there's maximum participation in them by both the underground utility owner-operators and by excavators. So exemptions need to be kept to a minimal level.
Well said.
So let me weigh in here a little bit. You know, again, we're talking about damage prevention, and I think one thing we agree is that contractors and operators agree is the need for stronger enforcement of the current damage prevention laws. You know, we're always continually working with our different owners and developers on their enforcement issues. Can you elaborate on the need for a stronger enforcement mechanism when working with these different owner operators?
Thank you, Doug. And let me start with that. And I won't just speak anecdotally, but with real examples that we've seen in the past year. you had a situation where CenturyLink failed to, it's a telecom operator, but an operator that needs to meet their responsibilities in damage prevention, failed to show up or were late to 68,000 locate requests over the course of 3 months. Consumers Energy did the same thing with 30,000. And we've had a problem with PG&E and other operators doing the same thing. And when a contractor doesn't dig or a contractor hits something and it's on them, they always seem to get hit to the high extent of the law. And operators, we just don't see that. So we feel, and what Martin's about to get into, is that any language that can strengthen state enforcement in a balanced way would be a very good thing.
Yeah, and why don't I pick up from there? A little bit about my background. I spent 24 years working for the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, which represents the large gas transmission operators. And going back about 20 years ago, we felt that a greater emphasis on improving state damage prevention programs should be a national priority, and therefore should be a part of these pipeline safety reauthorizations and a important priority for DOT and PHMSA. And so going back a little over 20 years ago, Congress started mandating that states begin to make improvements to their damage prevention programs in exchange for some incentives from the federal government to make these kind of improvements. It's worth noting that while the past 4 reauthorization, pipeline safety reauthorization bills have included something in them encouraging states to continue to make improvements to their damage prevention programs, the current reauthorization does not include such a provision and is silent on damage prevention. And we think it's important that Congress continue to weigh in on the importance of states making continuous improvement to these programs, which in effect reduce the incidence of some of the most preventable accidents in the pipeline sector. I was engaged about a year ago by a large gas utility operator to work on providing some additional incentives to states to make improvements to their damage prevention programs. And one of the areas that this utility wanted to focus on was state enforcement. A lot of states do a good and balanced job in terms of enforcing damage prevention programs within their borders, but there are some states that are lacking, that have inconsistent enforcement, that enforce only against certain types of entities and not others. Ultimately, we feel that by having a balanced enforcement of the state laws and procedures, that will incentivize maximum compliance with the state damage prevention program. That's our goal, to get to maximum compliance so that ultimately we're doing the most we can to reduce these preventable accidents.
And Martin, when I heard that, it was music to my ears. And Tom, let me put it on you. Do you see a problem with a lack of balanced enforcement in damage prevention law?
Absolutely. There's unfortunately, there's no real hard evidence, but there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that the facility operators themselves are more guilty than construction and excavators when it comes to damage at times. And we certainly are billed heavily for any kind of damage that we cause, and rightfully so if we cause it and it's not the result of mismarked or poorly marked facilities.
So Martin, I think it's safe to say that the excavators are with you, at least the NUCA excavators. So we're with you on this language, and we look forward to working with you.
So, Evan, should we talk a little bit about what exactly we're proposing to do under this legislative effort?
So folks know what to look for.
Yes. So just a couple of things worth mentioning. First, that we're gathering some additional data on state damage prevention efforts, such as the number of accidents that are associated with third-party damage, whether those accidents are the result of any existing state exemptions from participating in the program, and also what states are doing with respect to enforcing violations. We want to be able to gather that kind of information in the hopes that where there are problems, we're adding some additional scrutiny that can be converted into making some change at the policy level. And in addition, we were looking at what PHMSA could do to help bridge the gap. Right now, PHMSA has a couple of options in terms of incentivizing, if that's the right word, states to make improvements to their programs. One of those options is that PHMSA can decertify a state as the entity that regulates pipeline safety within that state. There's an existing process under law for PHMSA to decertify a state to be the regulator within the state. But for obvious reasons, that's a very unattractive alternative for PHMSA. They're reluctant to decertify a state because if they did, PHMSA would have to take over the pipeline safety program within that state. And suffice it to say that PHMSA doesn't have the resources to do that. So they're reluctant to use that option. The other thing that PHMSA could do is reduce the funding that PHMSA provides to the given state on an annual basis. But we felt like reducing funding was a counterproductive method of incentivizing better performance. So we wanted to create an alternative to those two seldom used, if ever used, options. And so our proposal would create a third option of essentially placing a state program within a penalty box for a year where that state is held harmless in terms of both their certification as a regulator and the funding they receive from PHMSA. And during that additional review by PHMSA, the state would have the opportunity to, in a public setting, bring out the various hurdles within the state that prevent that state program from achieving adequate enforcement. And they could be such issues as a need to modify or improve a state law. It could be that there's, as we just discussed a moment ago, insufficient enforcement across that state because the enforcement is divided among several different entities, and some entities do a good job and others don't. How do you sync up that enforcement within the state? We want to have that kind of open, transparent conversation within the state over ways to close the gap in terms of adequacy, and do so in a process that doesn't penalize, but gets the issues on the table, brings them out in public before policymakers so that those gaps can be closed in a constructive manner. That's, again, our goal. We want to bring all of the state programs up to the achievement level possible.
And so, Mark, just to be clear, in the end, what this does is offer another alternative to what's out there right now, which is decertifying or restricting funding, neither of which has ever really improved compliance with the state program.
Right, those are ineffective tools for PHMSA to use. tools that are very reluctant to use, if ever. It needs to be an alternative which allows conversation, negotiation, legislation, and ultimately getting to that broad-based level of improvement and compliance.
Thank you, Martin. Zach, back to you.
Thanks, everyone. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists one more time for their insightful comments on these issues. And before we close out, does anyone have any further things to add about this issue?
I'll just mention, as representing all the utility contractors, our motto is "We dig America." We promote world champion, world-class safety, and safety is at our utmost concern. And anything we can do to further safety is our number one goal. Thank you for your attention.